Hey everybody, Tom here, and today in this video, this is actually a new thing that I'm trying out. In this video, I'm going to teach you the general rules for how to play Root. Now, normally, I'm playing the game as I teach the rules, but Root is this really unique, big, super asymmetrical game that I have been wanting to play on this channel forever and ever and ever. But there's just no way in the world that my brain can handle playing several factions, which I would want to do if I was going to make a video to highlight the asymmetry of this game. So in this video, I'm going to be covering the general rules for the game. I'm going to be showing you how I teach the game, so that maybe if you're going to be teaching this to a group, you can get some ideas, or you could send this to other people. So I'm going to be setting up things on the regular map, okay? And I just wanted to point out that the base game does not come with these resin clearing markers. These are some that I bought, and I like them, but also I think they really help with the clarity instead of these small icons on the board. So I've decided to use them in this video. So with that said, I'm going to be recording this general how to play video. And then I'm going to record a sequence of videos, one video for every faction currently available. So in theory, if you're going to be having game night, or if you just want to learn about the factions, you could watch this to get a general feel for how this game works. And then if you're going to be playing a specific faction, maybe you want to learn how to play that faction, I will have videos for those too. And they will all be listed in the description of this video. Now, the last thing that I want to say before we dive in too deep is that I have actually created some boxes for all of the factions that are available. These are the four factions that come with the base game. And these boxes will hold all of the components and the cards that the different factions are going to need to play the game. So if you're interested in making these boxes, it's all available on Board Game Geek, but you can most easily access that by going to my website at tomteachesgames.com. So we have boxes for the factions, and while we're over here, I'm not going to talk in too much detail about the factions because I'm going to save that for the individual videos. But I do want to just give you a very general overview of what it will look like when you choose a faction. So when you play Root, everybody's going to pick a faction. So let's say that I'm going to be the blue player because I love blue and I'm always the blue player. Then I would have a bunch of components and a player board. Okay, so maybe I'd open up my box and I've got all of these pieces and I've got some of these cards down here and whatever. So just a general overview of what you are going to see for each faction is, first of all, this big player board. There's a bold side and a light side. The light side is going to list all of the pieces that you should have as you're playing. It's going to give you some information about how complex they are, how aggressive are they, crafting, we're going to be talking about that soon, things like that. So like how good are they at getting cards, whatever. It's going to give you a background about your faction. It's going to have some bolded words which will help you. Those bolded words are going to be like gameplay words that are going to be important for that faction. And it's going to give you some setup information. So I want to go into more detail on all of this stuff in the faction specific videos, but again, I just wanted to point out that each faction is going to have their own unique components. This board is going to define components like warriors, buildings, tokens, and other pieces, because these words are going to be important in gameplay. And then this side of the board is going to be absolutely unique to each player. There are always going to be 3 phases happening on your turn. And because every player is so different, it's going to list out all of the stuff that you can do here, some special abilities listed here, places to place tokens there, and stuff like that. So anyway, just a really quick, oh, that's not cute, just a really quick overview of what it might look like when you're playing a faction. So without further ado, welcome to Root. Let's talk about the game of Root. As I mentioned, Root, everybody's going to be playing a completely unique asymmetrical faction. And we're going to kind of be battling over these various plots and trying to earn victory points. Now, we've just done the general setup, but there's a lot more to go. Every faction has their own steps to set up. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to go ahead and set up what it would look like with a 4-faction game using all of the factions from the base box. So if we had all of those set up, the map would look like this. So here you can see what might be a typical 4-player base scenario setup. And as I mentioned, I will talk about how each faction sets themselves up in the faction videos. But having things set up is going to allow me to show you how some really common actions are going to play out. It's also going to allow me to introduce some vocabulary and things like that. But what I want to talk about is, it's just off camera, is that in Root, the point of the game is to try to be the first player, here's our tokens here, to be at 30 points, for the most part. That's the goal. Try to get to 30 points first. If you are, you're the winner. There's going to be another victory condition that we'll cover, and we'll talk about that in a second. And there's going to be some common actions we talk about to help you get points. But for the most part, every faction is going to have a unique way to score a bunch of points. But just keep that in mind. We're going for 30 points. If you get the 30 points, you're cool. So with that established, let's zoom in on the board so that we can learn some vocabulary that has to do with the actual pieces that we're going to see. The first thing we want to talk about when talking about Root is what sections there are on the board. Each of these sections kind of surrounded by these colorful trees and marked like this on the baseboard. You can kind of see this little semicircle here that I'm just trying to augment with this piece. These spaces are called clearings. And each clearing is going to have a suit. So we have here the mouse clearing is orange, the fox clearing is red, and the rabbit or bunny clearing is yellow. So clearing is where a lot of the action is going to happen. Clearings are connected with paths. That's going to be the little dotted gravel going on there. And so paths look like that, and paths will connect your clearings. And you're also going to see a river. And for the most part, your factions are going to ignore the river, except there are some factions that will use the river as a path, but not any of the factions that are here, and I'll be specific about the ones that do in those videos. So we've got clearings, again, they each have a suit, and then we have these paths, and then the forests are the sections inside of the clearings. And remember, for the most part, you can ignore the river, so like this is one big forest up here, another forest here, and things like that. Most of your factions can ignore the forests, but you're going to have some factions, including the vagabonds, that actually travel from forest to forest. So clearings, paths, forest, stuff like that. So that's some of the map vocabulary. Now let's talk about the pieces. For the most part, factions are going to have 4 types of pieces. If you have several of these wooden figures, they're going to be called warriors. So here you can see a whole bunch of the Marquise de Cat warriors on the board. Most factions are going to have some square tokens that are called buildings. And so square tokens that are buildings, they're going to go onto these spaces right here. There are going to be a few other square tokens that are not buildings, and one really good way that you could tell is this. On each player board, so this is for the orange player, so the player boards will list the buildings here, but buildings will always be square. And here's a different sample. The Vagabond faction doesn't have any warriors or buildings or tokens we're going to talk about soon, but they do have some square markers that are called other pieces. So they're going to have some items. They're also square, and these relationship markers, but they're not actually buildings. But for the most part, it's going to be pretty clear. The Vagabonds are just kind of a bunch of weirdos, but the buildings are going to be these square tokens. Then you're going to have, or these square markers, and then you're going to have the round tokens. So these are called tokens. And again, the boards will be really clear about that. These things here are called tokens, and that'll come up in gameplay, so that's why I'm being really specific about that. So there you have it. You have warriors, buildings, tokens, and then other pieces. So we have, like, this is a ruin, but underneath the ruin is an item, and that's just another piece, not a token or a building. Some factions are also going to have their own unique cards, so like that's listed here in the other pieces, but for the most part, all players are going to have access to a shared deck of cards. And so, in fact, at the beginning of the game, each player is going to start off with 3 of these cards. So let's talk about these cards. If I flip over this deck of cards, there's a couple of things that I want to point out. In fact, let's take this card over to a blank space just so you can see. The cards, the general use cards, are multi-use. So every single card is going to have a suit at the top. And hopefully you see off the bat, we have our 3 clearing types of suits. We've got foxes, we've got the mice, and we have the rabbits. So every single card is going to have a suit along the top, and various faction actions are going to utilize those suits. So maybe one faction will say, hey, you could play the fox suit to do something. And these will almost always have to do with actions on the board, depending on where you want to do those actions. So if you want to take one of these actions in the fox clearing, chances are good you're going to have to pay a card with the fox suit at the top. So that's the main function of those cards, is they're going to have these suits on the top that you use to pay for actions at the various locations on the board. You probably also saw that there's this turquoise bird color, and this is a wild suit. Some actions are going to require that you actually spend this specific card, but if you needed to spend a fox card and you don't have one, you could use this as a wild. So that's kind of cool. So that's like the number one function of these cards, is to give players these suits so that they can take those actions. Now, there's also these secondary actions. These all look, you can see they have icons up here at the top. So these are all crafting cards. We're going to talk about those in just a quick second. You're going to have crafting cards, and you're going to have dominance cards and ambush cards. We'll pull those out too. Okay, so I'm just kind of trying to browse through here and just pull out a couple of examples so that you can get a good feel for the different functions of these cards. Let's see, let's get one more dominance card out there. Oh, found another ambush. And come on, one more. There's another dominance. Okay, so along with having the suit at the top, there's 3 different types of cards you're going to want to keep an eye out for. Your factions are going to allow you the ability to craft stuff. And so let's look at the crafting cards here. So in some way, the factions are different. You're going to have the chance to take the crafting action. And let's say that I wanted to craft this card. What that means is I'm probably going to have, and again I say probably because it's faction dependent, I'm going to need to have some kind of a presence in 2 different bunny clearings. So again, depending on the faction, it'll usually mean that you're going to need to have some tokens or some buildings in 2 different clearings. If you can show that you have those things on your turn, you could take a craft action where you play this card and do whatever this thing says here at the bottom. So like this one's going to allow you to take a certain action that at the start of daylight you may initiate a battle. Okay, and I know that won't make sense if you're not familiar with Root, but these cards are just certain actions, again, that we would just have to have some kind of a token in the rabbit clearings to do. Here you'd have to have tokens in 2 different rabbit clearings. Here you would have to have tokens in 2 bunny clearings, or I said that rabbit, mouse, or here just 1 in one of the clearings. All right, so you can see these are kind of like actions that can happen, or this one is going to allow you to claim an item and then gain 3 cards and discard this card. So we'll get more into detail about crafting as we look at the factions individually. Again, I'm just trying to show you in general what people are going to be doing as they control or as they have things in these different spots. It's going to allow you to play these cards down, maybe get some points, maybe take some special actions. Okay, let's look at the ambush cards. Ambush cards are used to help you in battle. If somebody tries to attack you and you have an ambush, you're going to be able to weaken them a little bit before that ambush happens. So if you're about to do a battle or somebody attacks you, you could play an ambush card to try to weaken them, and they in turn will have an ability to play an ambush card to try to cancel your ambush card. So just keep an eye out for the word ambush. Those are usually good to hold on to in case somebody is going to attack you. And then there's this dominance card. Remember that I mentioned at the very beginning of this video that your main goal is to get 30 points. Well, depending on if you have a dominance card in your hand, that's going to offer you a different scoring, not a scoring opportunity, but a different victory condition. So if I was playing and I wanted to play this card down, it says if you have at least 10 points, play during the daylight and remove your score marker. So essentially, if I decide I don't want to go for 30 points anymore, I could remove my score marker, and all of the dominance cards will say that at the top, but I can remove my score marker and it will say you win the game if you rule 3 rabbit clearings at the start of your bird song. So don't worry about some of the scary vocabulary. The idea here is if you play this card down, you're taking yourself out of the running for 30 points, and you're going to say, I'm going to dominate all of the rabbit clearings. Or this one, I'm going to dominate all of the fox clearings, and so on. And so there's one for each of those. That brings us to the question of, what does it mean to rule something? This is kind of an area control. You're trying to take over these various areas on the board, and they're going to use the word rule to do that. In order to rule a clearing, you're going to count up how many warriors and buildings you have in that clearing. So obviously the orange player is going to rule this clearing because they're the only person with pieces here. The blue player rules this one because they're the only ones with pieces here. Let's change that up. So let's say during the game we have 2 warriors here. Ignore faction special rules, but essentially nobody would rule this clearing because they have the same number of warriors and buildings. Now this faction actually has a special ability where they rule anything where there's a tie, but for this video just ignore that. Same number of warriors, nobody rules it. Let's say that this faction had this building over here. Now they have 2 warriors, like between their warriors and their buildings, they have 2. These guys have 1, so the blue player is going to rule that clearing. Tokens don't add to ruling anything. Oh, that's a bad example. Let me grab a wood token. So if the orange player had this token here, that does not contribute to the ruling. It's just warriors and buildings. And you're going to need to rule places in order to do different things. Not just this dominance thing, but it's also going to help with your movement. So along with the card crafting action, there are also 4 basic actions that most factions will be able to do. So I want to talk about the rules for those 4 actions. So those 4 actions are going to be to move, to recruit, to build, and to battle. And so I want to talk about those 4 actions in general. Again, a lot of the factions will tweak some of the rules on these, but for the most part, you're gonna need to know this for your own faction or to be aware of it for the other factions. So we're going to go through those one at a time in that order that I listed, if I remember the order. Yeah, so we're going to start off with moving. So moving is pretty straightforward. If you take the move action, you can grab as many warriors from one of these spots on the map and move them along a path to another clearing. Okay, pretty straightforward. But there is a rule that you need to either rule or control the clearing that you're moving from or the clearing that you're moving to. So what would be a good example here? So for example, in this situation here, nobody rules this, except remember the blue faction actually would rule this. Pretend like that's not a thing. So in this case where they're tied on their ruling strength, then this cat could not move over here because they don't rule where they're leaving and they don't rule where they're going. This bird could move over here because they do rule where they're moving to. Or all of these birds could flock over this way, come on over this way, and just rule over there. So again, the big idea here with moving is that you're going to move as many warriors as you want to, and you just need to either rule or control the clearing where you're at or the clearing where you're going. Building is the other action, and usually in order to build you're going to have to rule a clearing. So right now the cat couldn't build here, but if this was over here then the cat could build. You can only build in open spaces. So if there's a ruin here, that's not open. I think I said ruin, I meant ruin. And again, each faction is going to kind of have different rules for how you build buildings. You're going to need to pay a cost of some kind, or maybe discard a card of the matching clearing, or whatever. But essentially, building means you're going to pay whatever cost specific to that faction. You likely need to rule the place where you're building, and you get to build a building just like that. Okay, so we've talked moving, we've talked building. Next was recruiting. Recruiting, again, is going to kind of be faction specific, but recruiting essentially means that you're going to bring another warrior onto the map. Sometimes you'll have to have a specific building token down or whatever, but yeah, that's the idea again. So moving is just moving, building is putting one of these down, recruiting is adding more warriors to the board. Again, make sure you're watching your faction rules. And finally, there's the ability to battle. So I'm going to just kind of do a little bit of movement here to set up a possible battle scenario. Let's say, here, let's do a little something like this. Okay, we're going to talk through a battle in this section right here. When you battle, on your turn, you are going to be the attacker. So let's say that we're the orange player here, and we're going to attack the blue player. What's going to happen is you're going to roll the 2 dice provided. Now these dice, they look like they're going to have lots of sides. It's basically 0, 1, 2, or 3 on both sides. So when a battle happens, the attacker is going to roll both dice. And in general, oh, this is kind of a funny example. In general, the way that this works is that you would, as the attacker, you would take the higher number, and the defender would take the lower number. Okay? So in this case, it was tied. That's kind of silly. So let's fix this. Let's make this a 3. Let's make this a 3. And here, just for an example, we're going to make this a 3 and a 2. All right, so we roll the dice. What a beautiful roll. Then you're going to count how many warriors you have. And I actually like to change the die because it helps me think better. But basically, your die number can't be bigger than the number of warriors you've got. So obviously we have 3 cats here, so having a 3 is fine. In this example, a 2 would need to be knocked down to a 1 like that because they only have 1 warrior. So you roll the dice, the attacker takes the higher number, the defender takes the lower number, but your number of warrior dictates the highest number that could be. There are going to be some abilities that allow you to make that number bigger if you want. But again, this is kind of the general idea. Now what this means is that the orange player is going to receive 1 hit from the blue player, and the blue player is going to receive 3 hits from the orange player. And when you receive hits, you get to decide what you remove from the board, but you need to remove warriors first. So for example, the orange player would need to remove 1 of their pieces from the board, but you've always got to remove your warriors before you take out buildings or other pieces. Okay, so in this case, we have this wood down here. It could maybe be eventually removed, but for now, the orange player would just remove 1 warrior, and the blue player would need to remove 3 pieces from the board. So they would have to remove their warrior first, and then they would have to remove this building. And anytime the opponent's building or other tokens are removed, you gain a point. So in this example, the orange player would clear out the blue player and receive 1 point for removing a building. All right, so let's set up another quick example, and I'll actually do it randomly this time. Okay, so let's go like this. No, let's go like this. Sure, why not? Okay, so we're going to have another battle, and I want to talk about how to ambush a player. So the way that an ambush works is you declare an attack. Okay, so let's say the blue player wants to attack the orange player. They declare, we're going to attack. Well, maybe the orange player has an ambush card in their hand. They could play an ambush card, and immediately what happens, and it'll describe it down here. Immediately, if the blue player can't counter with their own ambush card, so they'll have a chance to play their own ambush. So if they did have an ambush card, they could play it, and the ambush cancels, and the battle continues as normal. But in this example, let's say blue player's attacking orange. Orange says, I've got an ambush. Blue doesn't have an ambush card. Then what happens is, it says right here, at the start of the battle, the defender may play this card to deal 2 hits immediately. So in this example, orange plays this ambush. The blue player is going to take 2 hits immediately because they couldn't stop it from happening. And now they don't have any warriors. So you're still going to continue on with the battle, okay? And the attacker gets the higher number, the defender gets the lower number. But the attacker doesn't have any warriors here. There's 0 warriors here, so their hits really are 0. And in this example, the orange player rolled a 0, and so they can't actually defend, so no hits are dealt this way, no hits are dealt that way, and so in this example, the battle would end just like that. So ambush cards are pretty neat. If at this point the orange player wanted to attack the blue player just to remove this building and gain the point for it, even without warriors, the blue player could play an ambush card in order to remove these 2 if the orange player couldn't play another ambush to cancel the ambush effect. So battle can feel a little bit weird a few times. Just remember that you roll the dice, attacker takes the higher number, defender takes the lower number, but then your value can't be any higher than the number of warriors you've got, and then you're going to deal the hits to the opposing team, and that player gets to remove their own pieces from the board you've got to remove the warriors before you remove the tokens. So that's kind of how it goes. You've had your general overview now. So with all these different factions, there will be more rules in there, but we've covered the basics. We've covered movement and all that stuff. So moving, you've got a rule either where you're moving from or where you're moving to. Remember, ruling means you would count your number of warriors and buildings. You do not count any of the round tokens that contribute to that. So just buildings and warriors, that's how you calculate how you rule. So you're going to be able to move during the game. You're going to be able to build different buildings, which will do different things for you. You're going to be placing tokens and all of that stuff, trying to gain points. And the first person to 30 points wins, or the first person who plays the dominance card in front of them. Oh my gosh, I lost one. Where did it go? Oh, there it goes. Okay. Or, so if you don't want to do the 30 points thing, remember that once you've passed 10 points, then you're eligible to play this dominance card out in front of you. You'd remove your points token from the game, and now you're trying to meet this objective. And like in this example, try to rule. Now we know what rule is. Try to rule 3 of the mouse clearings. So you try to rule all 3 of those at the start of your, it says birdsong, that's the start of your turn. So if your turn can start, you still rule 3 of those, you'd be the winner. Otherwise, you're going for 30 points. I hope that was helpful. I know this video can feel kind of overwhelming. I almost recommend, if you're trying to learn the game and you don't have a teacher there in front of you necessarily, but you're trying to learn the game, it might be a good idea to watch this video and then your faction-specific video, and then maybe come back to this video if you have more questions. The learning to play is really a good place to go. There's so much information here. You can see right here, there's the piece glossary where it talks about the warriors, the buildings. The vagabond pawn is not a warrior because you don't have a whole bunch of them. This is its own thing. It'll talk about tokens and items and different kinds of markers, things like that. So there really are great references here. This book is very visual. It has really easy to find the information you need. So I recommend that you just keep this nearby for sure. But with that said, I'm going to go ahead and just leave that here. If you'd like to learn more about the factions, check in the description of this video below. And yeah, hopefully that will help you get Root up and going. Thank you so much for watching. I will talk to you later. Bye.